Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're going to get started here in just a couple minutes. Thanks. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jessica Arians. I'm the Senior Program Manager for Climate and Energy Policy at the National Wildlife Federation. And on behalf of the Federation, I want to welcome all of you to this Clean Economy Coalition of Color Roundtable, Building Equity into Clean Energy, How Leaders of Color Are Changing the Space. And we have a really esteemed panel of clean energy developers and advocates who are going to share their wisdom with us. But to kick us off, I want to welcome another esteemed advocate, Mustafa Santiago Ali, Executive Vice President of the National Wildlife Federation, to provide some opening remarks. So Mustafa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you to all the amazing folks who are both watching and participating tonight, and of course, everything that you do on a daily basis. You know, we began this journey a few years ago now and pulling together the CECC. And that came out of sets of conversations with leaders all across our country, frontline leaders and others who are saying, you know, we want to better position ourselves for this new clean economy. How do we help to make sure that, one, that it helps to address some of the public health impacts that are going on in our country? How does it also help for us to address the wealth gap that exists inside of our country? How does it help us to also address the impacts that are happening to public spaces and to wildlife? And then, of course, how does it also help us to address the climate crisis? We have in this moment an incredible opportunity to do all of those things. And before, there were a lot of great folks who had a lot of great ideas, but the resources just weren't lining up to be able to help folks to grow things out exponentially, to be able to make the changes that are necessary inside of our country. And thankfully, when the new Biden administration came in, they began to make significant investments. First, we had the bipartisan infrastructure bill, where folks from both sides of the aisle came together and said, you know, we have some crumbling and non-existent infrastructure that is existing inside of our country, and we've got to address that. And you know, we had what, $550 billion that came through that process. How do we make sure that those dollars are making it to the spaces and places that need them the most? How do we make sure that the disinvestment that has often happened in Black and Brown and Indigenous, Asian and Pacific Islander and lower wealth white communities, that we change that paradigm, move folks forward with a 21st century set of actions? And then we began to also move forward on the Inflation Reduction Act. And for the first time ever, we saw one of the most significant sets of resources to address many of the environmental issues that are going on in our country, and at the same time begin to build the infrastructure that is necessary to make the climate economy become a reality and to make sure that there's equity also in that process. And that's why Justice 40 is so important, because it helps to give a framework to be able to identify where our most vulnerable communities are. And we often don't talk enough about the CHIPS Act and how incredibly important the resources that are in that space helps us to build the technology that's necessary. How do we make sure the manufacturing opportunities, both from the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS Act, are actually being built here in our country, helping people to create their own sets of businesses and also to create millions of new jobs for workers? That's what this space is about, addressing all of those questions that we just went through. And they come from folks all across our country in both urban and rural communities. And that's why I'm so incredibly excited, because one, we have an amazing group of folks who are going to share their sets of experience, how they built businesses, how they're navigating, and also create on-ramps for all the folks who are watching how you can be a part of this transformation that's happening. You know, my grandmother says that you have power unless you give it away. We have an opportunity now to utilize our power in a positive way to lift up our country and to lift up our most vulnerable communities. And with that being said, I'm going to pass the mic back to our incredible host tonight, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Mustafa, for those inspiring words. And I'm going to turn it over to another esteemed colleague of mine to moderate our discussion. I want to introduce Adrienne Hollis, who's Vice President of Environmental Justice, Public Health, and Community Revitalization at NWF. And she's going to lead our panel discussion and Q&A tonight. So Adrienne, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. And thank you, Mustafa, so much for those inspiring and exciting words. I am so excited for our panel tonight, and I hope that you are too. So just sit back and let's learn something together. I'm going to introduce the panelists together, and then I'll let them individually tell us more about themselves. And remember, if you have any questions, please feel free to utilize the Q&A below or the chat feature. So our first speaker will be Adewale Ogunbadejo. He's Vice President of Workforce Development at Grid Alternatives. He believes that the necessity to address climate change is also an opportunity to build capacity within local citizenry, who can then actively participate as we move towards a just transition to clean energy. And we'll hear more about and from him shortly. The next panelist will be John Redcloud, who's Managing Director of Redcloud Renewables. He's a sixth generation direct descendant of Chief Redcloud, and his 4 children are the 7th generation, which is very important. He was born and raised on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and he finds inspiration knowing that he is doing something good and positive in the world, and he hopes to leave a legacy for future generations to build on. And I totally resonate with that. Next, we have Joseph McNeil. He's the General Manager of Sage Development Authority and an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe and the President of Standing Rock Development Corporation and manager for Rock Industries Corporation in Fort Yates, North Dakota. He's married and has 4 children. Mr. McNeil was recently awarded the Bush Foundation Fellowship for Leadership, as well as the MIT Oseti-Sakowan Fellows, Tribal Community Innovation. He is an activist for Indigenous rights and community economic development. Our final panelist is Jennifer Yoshimura. He's an energy justice and equity leader and project manager at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. She combines 20 years of industry knowledge and experience conducting software quality assurance with the Department of Defense, building engineering design in the Pacific Northwest, renewable energy planning at Hawaiian Electric Company, energy efficiency and conservation at Puget Sound Energy, otherwise known as PSE, and management of PSE's Transmission Engineering Department. Welcome to all of our speakers. And I'll invite each of you to say a little bit about you and your organization, and then we'll jump right into these wonderful questions. So may I call you by your first name? Adewale, please.
Thank you, Adrienne. I appreciate it. And good evening, everybody. Adewale Ogunbadejo, pronouns he, him, and I am the Vice President of Workforce Development for Grid Alternatives. And I sit in Los Angeles. So Grid Alternatives is one of the nation's largest solar nonprofits, and we're kind of on 2 sides of the house, and that we install solar, residential, affordable housing, and mission-aligned nonprofits. But we also have a workforce development arm where we want to make sure that we're training people from local communities so that they can access not just the environmental benefits, but also the economic benefits of this transition to clean energy. And our mission is really to build community-powered solutions to advance economic and environmental justice through renewable energy. And we really envision a rapid, equitable transition to a world powered by renewable energy that benefits everyone. So from where we sit, we see that our vision can only be realized with a solar workforce, that really is all inclusive. We have to go into the communities and make sure that we're training people. And we're really committed to creating job training opportunities that is inclusive of groups that are traditionally underrepresented and underserved in solar and clean energy. And that includes women, people of color, tribal communities, military veterans, and those impacted by the criminal justice system. How we do that, we have several programs and initiatives to provide training and connect employers to job seekers and vice versa. We're also building on an existing subcontractor model that's evolving into a mission-aligned contractor network in which we'll be able to work with and serve contractors from the same target demographics as they build out and expand their business to help meet the rapidly growing demands of the clean energy industry. So we're really on the side of equity and doing work that is driven by impact and tangible results. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adewale. Next, let us hear from Mr. Red Cloud.
Great. Thank you for the invitation. It's wonderful to be amongst this group. Red Cloud Renewable is based on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, the largest Indian reservation east of the Rockies. I represent, a proud lineage with the Red Cloud family, going back 6 generations. And as was mentioned earlier, my children represent the 7th, which is Red Cloud Renewable came together as a vision of my dad. His name is Chief Henry Red Cloud, and he believes that we are walking this, prayer forward. And the idea is that the decisions that we make today, we should be aware and cognizant that 7 generations from now, the things that we're doing are going to impact those people. So we're all, have a great responsibility, each of us. And for Red Cloud Renewable, we took it upon ourselves to provide a place-based solution on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And we provide renewable energy training. We have a first of its kind, one of its kind, fully functional renewable energy training center on an Indian reservation in the United States. So we have a training lab, we have mock roof, we have battery banks, we have a learning center, we have on-site lodging, we have a commercial kitchen, and we provide free culturally sensitive renewable energy training and education, hands-on wise, to Native Americans from all 574 federally recognized tribes. And we do so in a manner where we're leveraging as many community partnerships as we can. And we are also excited to be at this time with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act and the enormous potential that is now going to be made available to this country through harnessing the power of the sun. So we are incredibly excited. And again, I also echo Adewale's model there as we use our platform for workforce development. And we do ours with renewable energy training. We have a sustainable building program pillar, and we have a weatherization pillar. South Dakota can get awfully cold, sometimes. So we're using that to create awareness around energy usage and just making people better, more informed consumers, so that we can all do our part. But I'm grateful to be here, and thanks for the opportunity. And I'll pass it back to Adrienne. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Gosh, we're already off to such a fantastic start. Mr. McNeil, Joseph, can we hear from you next?
Sure. Hello, my relatives. My name is Joseph McNeil, Jr. I am an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. My Lakota name is Tatanka Wajila, which is one bull, and that is my great-great-grandfather, who existed at the turn of the reservation from when we were free to when we were forced on a war camp. And his vision and the vision of everyone, like my relative, John Red Cloud, he's just 5 hours from where I'm at, you know, and John's father and I, Henry, were both part of the Oceti Shakomi inaugural MIT Sol Fellowship, you know, Dona years back. And so it's good to see, you know, you, John, here, you know, carrying this forward, because it's an intergenerational discussion that we're having from us folks here on the call who are starting an intergenerational path moving forward for self-sustainability. As we continue to gather and see one another, it's important to be in a space where we see each other doing the work, because we can always feel a little isolated and islanded off from one another. So it's good to be on this call here. At Standing Rock, we're working on a 235 megawatt wind farm. We are in the interconnection queue phase process. We have begun our environmental studies. We're in year 2 of that. We're in year 2 of our Met Tower studies. And, you know, we have PPA folks who are lined up, you know, to have this discussion. But what has occurred in this last year with IRA has given us the ability to move beyond what was our original model. And our original model was doing pre-development for equity stake. You know, so the tribe formed this organization as a Section 17, so it removes it from the politics, but gives us the economic capacity and traits that the tribe has. So it gives us a unique space to work in. And that's something unique with tribes. But the model that we're doing, we're hoping any community can follow, as long as you can gather resources and be of a like mind to use those resources for community benefit. So as we move this process along, we intend to give what we are doing away to any other tribe or community that would like to understand how we did it. Who we did it with, I think, is important as well, because philanthropy and crowdsource funding only go so far. Federal grants only go so far. And who do you resonate with in community, so that these type of projects, when they're going through to the regulatory bodies, are recognized not just as one-off or unique little unicorns. This is the future coming at you guys. You need to start taking a look at your regulations, like the discussions we've had with FERC, you know, talking about this is a community-derived project, it is a commercial project, and yes, it's real, you know, so there's more of us coming. And so I'm happy to be on this call to talk about this, because I feel a lot of the work that we've done or are doing, particularly folks on this call, has not been done before. And so we're in those rooms as the first time a concept like this is being approached, shaking people's thoughts, and they say, you can't do that. It's not how we normally do business. But IRA is giving everybody the eyes wide open complexion to say, business is a little bit new. How can we make, you know, change happen? But folks are out there trying to make a buck too. But I think the difference for us is we're doing it for community. So I'm happy to be on the call with everybody here and, you know, have this discussion with you and be in community with you today. Oh.
Wow. Thank you so much, Joseph. I'm so excited. Every person just makes me more excited to hear, you know, our discussion that we're going to jump into in a minute. But our next speaker is Ms. Yashimura. Jennifer, please take the floor.
Yeah, thank you. And good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Appreciate the opportunity to join the amazing leaders on this panel, and also the attendees here. So Jennifer Yoshimura, pronouns she, her. I am an advisor and project manager at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, or PNNL. As a Kanaka Maoli, or Native Hawaiian, I bring a unique perspective in the work that I manage and I help lead at the lab. In the sense of working with a lot of communities through technical assistance, or TA programs, as well as research and other development work. I manage a variety of technical assistance programs that vary at the state level, the PUC level, as well as communities. Some of you may be aware of Energy Storage for Social Equity, or ES4SE. We're just wrapping up that technical assistance phase now with 14 communities making up a diverse spectrum from the East Coast to the West Coast and Hawaii, urban, rural, tribal, indigenous, remote, and islanded. communities and looking at how storage can address some of the community needs and challenges, coupled with community learnings and knowledge, as well as solar and on-site generation and distributed generation solutions. Within ES4SC, we've also made it a point to ensure that equity in workforce, I've heard workforce highlighted a lot, through economic and local development and opportunities. And so seeing where we can partner with communities and their goals, and looking at how technology and local workforce solutions can help further communities meeting their goals. And yeah, so again, really excited to be here. I feel like there's a lot of interest and opportunities, especially with the amount of funding. And I know that we'll talk a little bit later this evening to see, where there are reframing of partnerships and ensuring that relationships with communities are centered, and there's that partnerships that are, we create trust with them, and it's not a one and done and extractive approach with communities where historically there's been a lot of trauma and burdens. And so how the Department of Energy and the labs, as we're doing research and technical assistance, and how we change the framing of that work and in partnership and in conjunction with communities. So yeah, again, thank you for being here and appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And thank you to the four of you. This is great. I've been doing this work, working with disenfranchised communities for almost 25 years. And as Joseph said, we haven't had anything like this. And I'm so excited to see us take the lead, and do what needs to be done. Because as one of my friends says, the cavalry isn't coming, that's us. We've got to take care of ourselves and each other. So I am so appreciative of you all. And I'm so glad this is being recorded so that we can share it with, those who unfortunately couldn't be here. So my first question is for everyone. Everyone doesn't have to answer, but it's not for any specific panelist. And I just want to know if you could share your journey into the clean energy sector. Like, was there a path you followed or role models you leaned on? And or how did you make space for yourself in this sector, which is still predominantly white? Because, the saying, if about us not having a seat at the table or being on the menu. So just tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are and where you're going. And anyone can start. I'm not teaching tonight, so I won't call names.
I'll hop in. For us here at Standing Rock, we've always lived under the mantra, and I think most communities do, is that we're going to take care of ourselves. It's part of our charter. And when I was on tribal council 20 years back, I was 30 pounds lighter and really energetic at that time. We were talking about with one another about wind, because there was a lot of wind turbines going up at the time, and how do we use this to be self-sufficient? Not understanding what was the real mechanics behind the economics of it. We put an RFP out and had about 6 wind developers come, and at that time we understood that this was strictly a land lease deal they were looking at. So they were going to come one transaction and done. And if we get a few folks hired to do to be wind techs, wind turbine techs, it's about all we're going to look at. So we said at that time, this isn't really working for us, because our long-term plan is to have an economy that provides consistent generational jobs, management, and be able to build off of that ability to not just have one plant, but look at another plant, and then, moving further down the road. Come to find out, 10 years prior to that, another council had looked at doing the same thing. So this has really been in our makeup to do it. At that time, we had reached out to folks down at Cheyenne River, up north to Spirit Lake, and then further south down to Pine Ridge and Rosebud. Who else had the same idea? So we've always had this level of conversation, and then thinking about how can we get transmission out, because the one thing we realize here in the Dakotas is that we don't have transmission. So when our reservations were formed, we were reduced down to war camps, and those camps were kept desolate to keep us in check, basically, because they're afraid of our ability to fight. So not going there in a big distance, but I really could, is that they provided all of the services and resources around us, but kept us broke, redlined us, basically. So all the transmission was built around our communities. We realize this is something that needs to come forward and build transmission so that we can come out of this. There's a friend of mine named Bob Blake over in Minnesota with Native Sun. And he said this phrase the other day: there can be no just transition without just transmission. So it's really important to think about those things as we move forward and make our voices heard in those spaces, because we provide part of the solution for what the countries and the cities need. You know, everybody needs electricity. Everybody needs to do it in a way that serves two people. You know, this is a transaction. This is a business deal, and it has to serve both parties. On us, it has to serve us on our own terms, not what the terms are from the American culture for the last 200 years, which has been extractive, because we can't do that to our kids any longer. We are all, as citizens of the earth, looking at what we're doing in every step of the way to ensure that we're not taking away from our kids anymore, because now climate disasters at our front door. You know, so we can't be responsible looking at them making transactions that are going to hurt them and hurt us along the way. So we bring that to every conversation, and we all have to look at each other through that lens now. So we have a commonplace, I think, with a lot of the rooms that are majorly white males in that space. They're looking for part of that solution. So that's some of the things we can provide, just to give that thing about, you know, having a commonality, but then also the justice end of it. You know, like I said about us being one of the original red line communities, if we weren't destroyed or eliminated, terminated, then we were redlined. You know, so now we're coming into this place where we have large land bases and people are looking at us like, yo, you have all this land, you could provide electricity. And we're like, yeah, now you see us. Now we need just transmission, you know, moving forward. So it's a good place for us to be in. Like we said, it's a new day. And we have to ensure that our values are at that table, you know, not on the menu, but at the table. So as we're talking with these large corporates or transmission providers, we're really looking to make sure that they understand from A to Z that this is a partnership. This is not a transaction we're looking for. So most communities, as they're going to gather their resources and have this conversation, I think are all looking at that, because the simple transaction one and done leaves us in the same place we're in 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 years ago, you know, still at the whims of an economy that never served us. So I don't need to go there, but, you know.
Thank you, Joseph. Absolutely. And I noticed, Adewale, that you came off mute earlier. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, just to share my journey, because it's always interesting how I got here and how I arrived at where I am today. You know, I moved to California in 2007 and really didn't know much, if anything, about clean energy, solar, or whatever the case, but had always been working, you know, in the community space and being in service to the community. And at the time I was working for Cal State University, Dominguez Hills, for an organization called CAPI, which is the California African American Political Economic Institute, and really working on disseminating information to the African American community, making sure that they understood what kind of policies were coming down. But for anybody who's like on the policy side of things, you don't often get to see it implemented. You know, so after a while, I really wanted to be on the ground, seeing things get done. And I had an uncle who was in the solar space and invited me to go to Vietnam for a month and look at some solar projects. So I went to Vietnam. I was there for a month, and it was lovely. You know, I was in Vietnam learning about solar, something I knew nothing about. And when I came back to Los Angeles, I said, I need to look at this a little bit more, because anything that can get me to Vietnam, you know, is worth my time. But also it just being, you know, I think the clean energy space was still relatively new at that time. And it was beginning to grow in California. And I found out about grid alternatives and I thought I was going to be a solar installer. So I was like, let me get on the roof and figure out how to install. My father's Nigerian, so I wanted to take it back to Africa and, address energy poverty on the continent. But because my work was, historically working in kind of this community service space, I helped to build out the volunteer program, which eventually turned into our workforce development program, which is what we have today. So, I worked in Los Angeles, Greater Los Angeles, for a little bit over a decade, building out the workforce development program in Los Angeles. Today I head up the workforce development program at a national level, which for me has been a great journey. And I think being able to see individuals that look like me and open up doors of opportunity so that they can step into the space is what keeps me coming back every day, right? And we know clean energy is here to stay. We know we have to make this transition. And it's really, for me, about who's going to do the work and how we, creating accessible pathways, again, to make sure that we're not only benefiting from the environmental benefits of clean energy, but also the economic benefits. So.
Absolutely. Jennifer, John, I invite you to share with us if you'd like.
Yeah, sure thing. I can share a little bit more about my background and into the clean energy space. And then, I think how other leaders and role models that I've seen or didn't see in my early careers help kind of pave that path. But I, started with an electrical engineering degree, as you mentioned, with the Department of Defense, and had an opportunity to go into the consulting space, did engineering designs for tech companies and K through 12 schools and higher ed, and was passionate about renewable energy, especially solar, about 15 years ago, and had an opportunity to return to the islands and work for Hawaiian Electric in renewable energy planning. And saw a lot of tension and conflict between legislation and renewable portfolio standards, coupled with environmental advocates and challenges with the PUC, but how communities, especially Indigenous Native Hawaiian communities, were always left out of that process. And the impact to the Native Hawaiian communities, and then those South Pacific Islanders that also immigrated to Hawaii. And this disconnect as well, or incongruence and partnership between conservation, Indigenous knowledge, and renewable energy. And so I returned to the mainland and worked at PSE doing energy efficiency and conservation, and then stepped into engineering management. But throughout that time, I feel like over 20 years, there's been this uneducation to re-educate myself from an Indigenous perspective because of the assimilation in what we're taught from an engineering framework and a Western framework and a colonization framework. And kind of where we're at right now, in my opinion, we need really a holistic understanding and really leaning on Indigenous knowledge to partner with Western technologies to get to clean energy solutions for communities. There's the technologies are there, but I feel like it will only get us so far, right? And so I feel like those role models in my career, I didn't know them at the time, but I followed them, Native Hawaiian scholars and leaders. And so it's how I'm reintegrating what I've learned in the past and how I move forward and how I spend my privilege and roles at the lab in the work that we're doing within the community space, within the grid space, through technical assistance and research. But I don't recall, having that space or voice early in my career. There's been a lot of learning and leaning on others to create space for me and finding the courage for my voice and actions. And then now that I'm in a position of power, how I can create space for others and advocate for others and amplify for others as we move forward. So yeah, that's been my journey over 20 years, and excited to be where we're at and to actually have, funding and an acknowledgement of the intersection of racial social justice and recognizing communities, especially those that aren't recognized, like Native Hawaiians and the inability to access some of the benefits and fundings that we see right now. So I think recognition is really important as we talk about the funding and opportunities for clean energy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jennifer. John.
Yeah, thank you. So in among the Lakota, you know, there's this worship around the sun, and it really goes back, you know, generations. It's called the Wiwangwachipi, the sun dance. And there's this term, it's called Ampetuwit Hawonia Wakan, which is the power of the life-giving sun. So for us, it was a natural way to make solar energy, you know, and how it's powered from the sun, and relate it to the people who that's what they inherently believe. And looking around the Pine Ridge Reservation, there's a lot of poverty, a lot of despondency, unemployment, 75, 80%, just like enormous numbers. And what we figured was, as a grassroots community solution there, we recognize some of the needs of the people best. You know, my dad and I were born and raised on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and we realized that, you know, the answer has been amongst us. You know, if we're able to listen to some of this wisdom of our ancestors and look at some of these concepts around the sun, it's like, okay, well, let's harness the power of the sun. Let's teach our people about how to do that. And what we're doing is looking at some of the policies that were regrettable between the government and a lot of American Indian tribes, you know, and we're now trying to take the best of both worlds. So there's a lot of beauty and pageantry and heritage and ritual and ceremony amongst all Native folks, you know, and there's also a lot that mainstream society, you know, has taught us with technology. So we're trying to bring the best of both worlds and provide an opportunity. And for us, what we're doing is we're trying to create stakeholders in our community amongst tribal members. And one thing my dad talks about is, you know, this, you see these pictures of these natives from years ago standing in line. You know, you go stand in that line over there. They're going to tell you how to get your land. Go stand in that line. You're going to get your supplies. Go stand over here. And it's like, we don't want to stand in line anymore. You know, we're going to get out of line and we're going to do something about it. So by providing this to our tribal members first, and then recognizing there's a great need out there. 574 tribes, about 2 million Native Americans in this country. There's a lot of work to do. And people wake up on the reservation. And just the other day, I went to a home of a tribal elder, Vietnam veteran, you know, and his light bill is $790. It's due in 2 weeks. Unfortunate things like that. And it's like all of us, and we're trying to pass this on to our people and to others. Like, guess what? You don't have to pay your sun bill, you know, it's there for you every single morning. So we're trying to relate it in concepts that the people recognize. Winning of the hearts and minds is what we're trying to do. And in the process, we started to create solar warriors. You know, we are all here, you know, we all have a responsibility to defend, you know, the resources that we're all privileged to have around us. Each day we drive by and probably don't recognize all the beauty that's out there. So we have a great responsibility, and it's really recognizing that and using that power of that sun, and just being able to say, look, we don't need big oil. You know, we don't need all this dirty energy. Let's do things in a clean way. And that way our 7 generations from us will think about us and like, wow, they sure made the right decision at the right time. So that's what Red Cloud Renewable does, is harnessing that ancestral knowledge and really combining it with the best of what today has to offer us. So that's how our origin story began, and here we are today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you all. You know, I have this, my background photo is of a, as you see in the background, that's a fossil fuel facility, and in the foreground, what you can't see is a elementary school off to my right. And because these are the sorts of things that the communities that I work with have to deal with every day, I was really excited to hear your information, and, you know, so that we can just learn more. And I'm just excited, you know, just to be here. I keep saying that because I feel that, and I just have to reiterate that. So my first question is going to be, my first individual question is for Jennifer. And that was supposed to be my lead into this question. I wanted to know what lessons from your work with engaging communities in energy storage in both project development and deployment should decision makers consider as they try to engage communities, particularly disadvantaged communities, in the BIL or the IRA program?
Yeah, great question. So I feel like, there's the individuals who are creating programs that have pathways for funding to go through. And so I feel like, thoughtfulness in removing barriers and access for applicants, especially communities that are applying for these funding opportunities are a big one. Examples are like cost sharing and reporting requirements. Sometimes those opportunities can be in hundreds of pages, and communities are over capacity and under resourced. And so making sure that even the entryway to get to these opportunities, those barriers are removed and eliminated. For partners and those interested in partnering with communities, I feel like the most important part is really understanding the communities first before individuals and organizations go in, especially if there's no community relationships first. Trust is everything. It seems like it's common sense, but it's not always at the front of mind of individuals, especially when you have the enormous funding that's available. And so engaging with communities and building those relationships, it takes time. And that trust building. I feel like there's a lot of partners and organizations that have relationships with communities. And so thinking of other ways to partner and not burden the existing communities who are already over capacity. The other one too is educating yourself in understanding like history and context and culture, traumas and harm, and not asking the communities to educate you going in. So you need to come to the table with a foundational knowledge and have some a starting point to have dialogues. Technology is a big thing that we're talking about, and at the same time, making sure, in my opinion, you're not leading with technology. Through the listening and the conversations and dialogue, it's really the people in the community and how technology may or may not solve some of the challenges, right? And or to get to goals. And so it needs to be a collaborative process. And if and where technology fits, having that understanding and not really driving technology solutions ahead of the people and the communities. I feel like the other aspects I hear a lot, and what I observe a lot, and especially in Hawaii, is really just installing the systems, and then companies will walk away. And so there's a huge opportunity in understanding the training and the workforce development. How are contract mechanisms being created from your prime? Does a percentage of contracts require local job force and recruiting? How does partnerships work with vocational schools? And so you're creating mechanisms through systems to actually flow the funding to these communities that require training and workforce development, from installers to verification folks, commissioners, and then operations and maintenance, and providing a depth and breadth of opportunities beyond just the development of systems to deployment. So I would say there's a really holistic aspect, I feel like, of how partners should be approaching communities. And then also recognizing too, there are disadvantaged communities, but letting communities identify themselves as well. I think that's really important in understanding how communities and individuals will recognize and have that self-identification. They don't always want to be identified as a disadvantaged or marginalized community. So I think that's another big one.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and everything you said resonates. And I something you said about common sense made me think about what my grandmother, I'm sure other grandmothers said, common sense isn't that common, which then I thought about what John said about the sun. And, that's not something people think about, normally because it's, it makes too much sense, right? It's too much like right. So that definitely resonated with me. And everything you said was right on point. And what I neglected to say to all of the panelists is that when I give a question, feel free to jump in. It's not just specific to one person. Please feel free if you'd like to add anything to any question. So you have the opportunity to do that now if you feel like it, if you feel so moved. If not, we can continue on.
I think Jennifer was right on with her comments about community and how people perceive community and how folks who are coming into community aren't finding that person to connect with so that they can have a better understanding, of what the community needs are, what people really want, and just have that real honest heart-to-heart conversation, about the people that you intend to engage with. And what you said about being called disadvantaged communities, et cetera, that is so on point, because that's not who we are. We're survivors. We're not necessarily living in poverty, we're surviving, and thriving. And that's the point, we're self-directing ourselves to come through this. We have vision, to move forward. So I just want to applaud everything Jen just talked about.
Exactly right. Great. Thank you so much, Joseph. So my next question is initially for Joseph and John. I wanted to know if there are particular challenges that tribal and indigenous communities face in the renewable energy industry that perhaps other disadvantaged communities don't. And if so, I'll continue because I love long questions that you'll forget. If so, what recommendations do you have for federal decision makers to ensure that the energy needs of tribal communities are met in the implementation of these bills?
Yeah, thank you. Growing up in Pine Ridge, I don't think I realized this at first, but there's a real lack of opportunity there. We're pretty far off the nearest interstate. I would say we're about 90 minutes, from the nearest airport in Rapid City. So growing up on the reservation, you just don't realize that until you leave. And then you realize something comes up and you can go and get a medical procedure done, or, you can go to the Walmart or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, it becomes commonplace for you. Something needs to be done. We're going to make a whole day out of it. So you don't realize that as a young person until something happens, something befalls you or a family member, or somehow you're impacted, like one of these life-altering events. And then you realize, wait a minute, we're kind of, why is it that this is the way that it is out here, So growing up on the reservation, you look to tribal leadership, you look at the kind of the political structure in place, and you realize at a certain point, that's not the way that we were designed to govern ourselves. The way that was put in place, the Indian Reorganization Act, was in fact designed to break up the Teoshpaya system, the way that we traditionally governed ourselves. And imagine having somebody come to you and say, everything you and your relatives ancestors have spoken, the way you speak, how you believe, how you worship, it's all been wrong. It's all been backwards. You've had it all wrong. I mean, imagine being told that and then disciplined for trying to tenaciously cling to that history. So there's a lot of trauma that goes on with that. And today, we can't revisit history, of course, but what we can do is make a concerted effort to be part of the conversation. And part of the vision that Chief Red Cloud had is, he said, by his 7th generation, which are my children, he said, we need to be able to use these words, learn how to read, learn how to write, learn how to speak this new language, because there was some trickery that happened. People brought some papers, didn't know what it said, make an X here. All of a sudden your land disappeared and you just gave away something. But no, wait, they give you some flour, they give you a few horses. So, those a lot of that kind of happened. And for us, we're realizing that we need to try and make sure that the people that we are privileged to really represent recognize that we are trying to create a future. I think all of us here, that doesn't exist yet. You know, we're trying to look at a place and really gain prominence in the national conversation. And I really applaud the current administration for taking this enormous step and taking this concerted effort to bring many of us in the fold. And to answer the second part of your question, Dr. Hollis, is in order for this to have a beneficial impact for the people who are in need the most, some of these advisory councils, these decision-making bodies, you know, some of these bigger discussions need to include some of the people that recognize some of these problems inherently, who have felt them, who maybe might have the right answer, but just have never been considered as a worthy voice. So I'm really grateful that things are changing. And I know we have a bit of ways to go, but I do envision that, you know, one day, you know, our government, you know, this experiment of democracy will in fact reflect the real population that this country is, because currently it doesn't. I mean, we have to be honest with ourselves. You know, this country does not reflect the demographic that this, you know, that we are from coast to coast and up to Alaska and out to the islands. It doesn't really reflect that. So we're not where we need to be, but I think this government took a huge step most recently, and that's part of what the answer is. But it's just gonna, I think it requires decision makers to continue believing that they're making the right decision and to trust some of the voices that are in this room today, that we know what's best for us, and you just have to trust that we're going to make the call. Thank you. I'll pass it off to Joseph.
Oh, thank you very much for that, because you touched on a couple of really key points, and I'm really appreciative of that. For us and tribal nations, federally recognized tribes, the IRA legislation really did force us to comport, forced us to comply so that we could survive. Because if we didn't adopt the IRA legislation, which is Indian Reorganization Act, which means that we govern ourselves only through the rules of the Bureau of Indian Affairs by a regulated set of bodies that reflect the United States government, we had to act like them, be like them. We could still talk our language, etc., but our religion was outlawed until I think it's 73 or 76, but there's so much to say there. But all communities have to comport and comply with the government at large, writ large. So for us, the difference being trust land and being wards of the state, as it were described or can be described, and how do we move forward in that space? Tribal councils through the IRA legislation were given, through the IRA Act, were given all the power to make all the decisions, but they all had to be approved of by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So you had all the power and none. So coming from that history and that trauma, of making decisions that had to be approved of, and coming into a place where we're making our own decisions and trying to let go of that pain and that past and have the confidence to move forward and listen to our elders and look at our kids and try to make these right decisions, because the internet's here, there's information here, people are talking, people are gathering, convening and learning from one another and making this right decision that John just talked about, listening to everyone in community. Adrienne, I look back at the picture behind you because that reflects a lot of our communities. I look at basically our river here. In the 50s, we were flooded out to provide rural electricity for the rest of the states. That wasn't a decision. That was, what do you call it when you force a decision? And just like the DAPL pipeline, that was a forced decision that they made to provide, oil, down to Louisiana for somebody's making money. It wasn't us, but we weren't considered in that decision. North of Bismarck, our community north of us, it's 95% of white population. The PUC in North Dakota State took a look at that and they made a snap decision. We're not going to put that up because it's a danger to the community. And yet they put it 1 mile north of our closest community. So we look at that kind of thing and we go, we still have these big problems because our communities are not being considered for the risks, to provide energy. So what do we do? You know, and I'm happy you asked the question because we have to lead and make our own decisions and gather our own resources to provide power for ourselves. If the American government's not going to do it for us because they haven't done it for us until looking at this new IRA legislation, you know, providing a pathway forward, we have to do it for ourselves. And we have to continue to think about that because our parents and our grandparents survived so that we can make these decisions today. So a tribal nation has certain sets of laws that, you know, we have to work through. BIA is looking at our wind farm going, wow, we never did that before. So we have to write legislation here for the tribe. We have to write our own leases that they have to approve. Easements, rights of ways, all of those things exist, but they never existed for a wind farm. And then, you know, we start talking about other economic opportunities like hemp. And so, you know, there's the whole regulatory beef of that because we have to live by federal laws, not just state laws or tribal laws. We also have to comport to federal laws. And so we have 3 tiers of jurisdictions that we have to work through: tribal, state, and federal, depending, because our lands are checkerboarded. So for us, it creates, you know, just got a little more work to do, I think, sometimes, but, you know, we're getting to it and through it. I think all communities are looking at that and how we make these things, you know, happen moving forward.
Thank you both. I have to say, you make me want to, you know, I'm not a Baptist, but you make me want to just amen and co-sign on everything you said because it resonates with me. So I appreciate everything so much. The next question is for Adewale. Can you talk a little bit about the connectivity between large federal clean energy investments and career development? And how should we ensure that the federal dollars we're talking about are also helping build a new energy workforce, one that's accessible to everyone? Actually, that's a question for everyone too. I invite you after Adewale, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Hollis. Is an interesting question because we have to come up with creative solutions. I think when you look at, you know, IRA and you look at Bill, there's a lot of money that's been set aside specifically for the build out of the energy infrastructure. However, more money could go specifically towards workforce development, and that's where we kind of find the problem, right? So we have to be creative and innovative in our strategies of how we raise the funding to build out workforce development programs that are going to help us meet the need that is going to be required to build out the energy infrastructure. I think in the solar industry, we're currently at about 250,000 solar workers. And it's believed that by 2035, we're going to need double or triple that. So anywhere in the range of 500,000 to 750,000 solar workers are going to be needed. And there's going to be a need for another, I want to say in the range of 80,000 electricians or something. That's just, it's a massive number, right? If it took us over, you know, close to 15 years to get to 250,000 solar workers, how are we going to triple that number by 2035, right? So there has to be, I think, a massive investment. Just as much as we're investing in the infrastructure, we have to invest in workforce development systems. I think when you look at the more traditional industries like electrical or, you know, carpentry, those are mature ecosystems, if you will, whereas solar is very new, right? So what does that look like? How do we partner with community-based organizations? How do we partner with existing workforce systems? How does clean energy tie into the workforce system so that we're not just looking at the technical training, but we're looking at how do we support the holistic development of an individual? You know, in our communities, we work with individuals who are justice involved, right? And coming out of the system, and there's barriers to entry that we have to address. We work with individuals who are unemployed or underemployed, right? And, you know, young people that have never had bank accounts, and, you know, so it's one thing to get them into jobs, but how do they keep these jobs? How do they build them into careers, right? So we need to make sure that we're doing that work in a way that's holistic. We need to make sure that dollars have been set aside specifically for clean energy workforce. and that we're not just pulling people, from Craigslist, right? Because that's how it was done back in the day, right? It's like just anybody you can get. They used to say all they need is warm bodies, right? But how is that really building out an equitable clean energy industry that includes everybody? So I think that, there needs to be specific investments at the federal level and at the state level that we can all tap into, as we consider like how we're going to scale and build out the clean energy infrastructure. So there's a lot more to unpack, but definitely want to, open up the space.
Thank you so much. Anyone like to jump in with the comment? Okay, I have one thing. Oh, Joseph, go on, Joseph.
What Adewale said about financial literacy is critical when we're providing jobs and opportunity, because if you haven't had choice and you're forced to live on a system, for generations, then it's something that is foreign to you. So providing a voice that helps that in community, or at least that part of the funding mechanism that could get to those community organizations that can reach out and do financial literacy training, home ownership programs, credit, investment. What are the things that were never part of your life before are now possible choices for you because of this job and the duration that it has? These are the level sets of choices that you can make coming forward if you manage your money like this. Or you can get into entrepreneurship. And if you do that, these are the rules for that, so that you can have at least a successful idea of how to do that, because we didn't necessarily have generations of business owners in our families, so we didn't have that knowledge passed down to us or passed on to us as secondhand or, firsthand knowledge. So it's interesting as we're looking at these things that are coming, these job opportunities, but, we're talking about, like Jennifer had mentioned, getting into community, finding what community needs to do, or what community needs are, who is in community that can help facilitate a lot of these particular issues, because it might be that folks get a job and leave, and that would just, that would decay community. So we want to ensure that we're looking at this. So if there's people on the call that have outreach or have impact to some of these circles, it's something to think about. One thing that went through my mind quick about it, if I can, is that a lot of these agencies aren't completely staffed, so they're putting out these bills. They don't have enough staff on to take the applications and get them done in a time. We put in grants last year, and it's a year and they're about to put out the grant again, but they haven't released the results from last year. So they are very ambitious, which is great, but we need to really talk with them about, funding these offices so that they are applicable to the communities that they mean to work with. We put in for a grant for direct loan program that was so hurried, we come to find out that it was built for nuclear energy, not for renewable energy, but they were in such a hurry to get something out, that this is what was done, because we're looking and reading at this like, this doesn't apply. How are we supposed to do this? Because we're spending precious time and dime on doing these grants, and our resources are scarce. So it's really important to have that part of the conversation as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Great points. Jennifer.
Yeah, I resonate with everything that's already been shared. I feel like just adding one more point to the discussion, I would say is like really encouraging companies, trades, unions to reevaluate their hiring processes and requirements. There's a lot of Black, Brown, Indigenous individuals who've been incarcerated, and like intersection of challenges and of just systems and institutions. And so as we're thinking and we're talking about workforce development, I want to acknowledge that there is a set of communities that have been heavily impacted that can't get jobs, right? And understanding how companies with power and privilege, by changing hiring requirements, can actually help that workforce develop to reach the needs that we need to get to by 2035. So.
Thank you. Absolutely. Absolutely. So two things. One, we're going to go to, I have another question that's for everyone, but first, I recognize that names have power, but I also appreciate when my friends call me by my first name. Adrienne, and only my mom calls me Dr. Hollis. So that's for you, John and Adewale. It's Adrienne. Thank you. The second thing is, we worked, when I say we, a bunch of environmental justice groups, and actually NWF also worked with a community that had been pretty much burned by, government and such, and they had never been on city water, and they were on well water until the wells were found to be contaminated 40 plus years ago. So they were unincorporated, and getting them, we were able to work with others. Actually, we just contribute a little to get solar hydro panels so that they'd have access to at least clean drinking water. But it was difficult to get everybody on board initially, right? Because there'd been so much extraction and just bad things happening to them, or that they felt they were disrespected and treated unfairly a lot. And so I'm wondering, this is for the panel, what barriers have you seen when working with BIPOC, which isn't my favorite term, but we'll use that today, with BIPOC communities to implement and expand clean energy access in your work? If any, I should say. Anyone can go. Or Dr. Hollis will come out.
Can you say the question again, please?
Yes. What barriers have you seen when working with BIPOC communities to implement and expand clean energy access?
Yeah, I think trust is a big one. When we started at Grid Alternatives installing solar for quote unquote low income communities, I love earlier that was said, like, giving the communities, letting them define themselves. But when we started doing the work in those communities, we were installing solar at no cost for the families. And it was harder to give the solar away than it was to come in and sell the solar to families, because, they were thinking we were there for the wrong reasons, right? Because it is a money grab, and there have been a lot of, businesses that come into the community, and before you know it, you have a lien on your home or whatever the case, So I think you have to really build the trust of the community, is big. And I love what Jennifer said when, looking at it on the workforce side is, we have a way that we hire people in this country for a long time, and like it's created a lot of barriers to move and put people into employment opportunities. So when we look at things like the war on drugs and how it disproportionately impacted communities of color, a lot of people were locked up for decades. A lot of people had drug cases that prevented them from moving into career opportunities, and they ended up being pigeonholed, and not being able to be a productive part of the workforce. So I think in the clean energy space, we have the opportunity to look at things different, right? And we should go back and look at the hiring policies and make sure that things are equitable. So for me, I think it's really two of the biggest things are really dealing with the trust issue, and then how do we remove some of those barriers in terms of moving individuals into career and employment opportunities in the industry.
If I can hop in on that, one thing that came to mind is the FERC and the tariffs that exist, federally, and then how that trickles down to your ISO, which is your interconnection service operator, your G&T, your generation and transmission operator, which then goes either to your municipality or your rural electric provider, which brings power to your home. Now, we want to re-electrify communities or electrify communities. Residences can get a certain rate and can build the power to so many kilowatts. And if they go beyond that, then they're forced to go to the PERPA rate. And the PERPA rate is like the cost of the cheapest form of electric generation in that region. And right now here in North Dakota, that's propane or natural gas, and it's like 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour, maybe a little more. You can't finance microgrid projects to benefit particularly our communities. When we're looking at, what John is talking about, what he's looking at, we have 60 to 70% unemployment, 40 to 50% poverty rate. And a lot of communities who are looking to do that, BIPOC communities are looking to do that, provide rural renewable energy can't get it financed through that way, but it goes all the way up to the FERC and the tariff rates that trickle down. So we have to look at how a legislative solution or policy solution can be provided for that is economic both ways. One, so that we can lift up our own communities, and then two, provides a shock absorber, as it will, for the existing infrastructure, economic infrastructure that's already there. You know, so because we want to do, our goal is to use the revenue from the wind farm to build out these systems. So as a tribal utility, then we would be able to survive economically, you know, not just build the power and give the power away, but it has to be a business to last generations. So when we think about that and look at what are the reasons why, you know, the PURPA rate is there, it's so that the existing G&T providers, generation transmission providers, can control the market to ensure that what they built lasts and exists. But now we're talking about this funding, community renewable energy. And I'm like, how can that exist if no one's addressing the policy, you know, with the PURPA rate and how microgrids really exist in the long term for communities, remote communities and communities of color.
Thank you so much, Joseph. John.
Yeah, I would say that in the United States, I think there are some unique pathologies that kind of afflict this country. The widening wealth gap. I think I saw the other day, there was two white men, you know, have 40% of this country's wealth. Two. I'm pretty sure that's Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. But that was an interesting, really astounding fact. And so you have the widening wealth gap. You have this really, I guess, the political polarization in this country and the systemic racism. So for people that are in the BIPOC communities, they're really up against something. So like on Pine Ridge, the talent pool there of educated individuals is fairly low. And there's been this mass exodus of younger people who recognize, because of the information superhighway, they're all connected. They're like, there's really nothing here. You know, we've got to go where the opportunity is. So there's that's going on. And then also, you know, those of us who are fortunate enough to have any sort of post-secondary education, you look around on a college campus, you're not finding very many people that look like you so much. You know, it's definitely a lot of people that have opportunity, and we're kind of blazing a trail, you know, for some of them. So I think just the standard that is in place, that system, whether it was intentional or inadvertent, you know, certainly is exclusive of BIPOC communities, and we're slowly making inroads towards that. You know, there's numbers that are increasing, but it's just, I think it's going to take a bit more time. And as long as we can be good stewards of some of these federal funds we're entrusted to expend for our communities, then we can report back and say, we're doing good and we can do more. And money is not always the answer, but it sure does help, you know, kind of alleviate some of these concerns amongst the people. So that would be my simple answer. I'm sure there's a lot more there, but that would be my simple answer. Adrienne, thank you.
Thank you, John.
I would resonate with what all the other leaders have shared. You know, I feel like trust is a big one. I think there's a lot of you know, historical decisions and policies that have been made in the past. I've shared this with Jessica in introductions last week. You know, the system wasn't created with equity, yet we're trying to get to equitable outcomes. And so how do we break the system to actually create equity to get to the outcomes that we desire? And I think that the recognition of communities, you know, especially with the amount of funding that we're looking at and clean energy, it's important to know that who is not at the table and who doesn't have access to the benefits, because those communities will continue to see larger gaps of disparity. I also think, you know, the barriers, although we're talking about energy, we've talked a lot about intersection. And I think leaders, especially those with power and privilege, don't understand the intersection of of energy and transportation, health and wellness, education, food security, and basic needs. And so, having a holistic understanding of that is a barrier. And so I feel like there's an education two ways. I know we've talked a lot about workforce and how we want to educate our communities for local development, but I do think leaders in positions of power, whether it's government and state agencies and local agencies, as well as developers or partners that want to partner with communities, they need to be educated in understanding the intersection of how energy intersects with all of the other aspects for a healthy community, and making sure that communities are not being extracted on, that they've historically have had to burden, whether it's cultural or resources or capital extraction, to get to equitable and clean energy outcomes. So I feel like a lot of barriers as we've moved forward together that we're going to have to break down.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much. And this, we're going to take a question from the audience. There's some great questions in there. This one I think is very good and very hopefully will be something that you could really respond to and give us a path forward. And it's someone from the audience says, how can we help amplify your leadership voices as leaders of marginalized communities? What can we do? Easy, hard question.
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. How can we help amplify your leadership voices as leaders of marginalized communities? So how can we amplify your voices, the work that you do, right? And that's an audience question.
Well, one thing I think of in particular for, our project is that we've done a lot through philanthropy, and we've done a lot through grants, reaching up into the state and to the federal grants, having that conversations with folks at FERC, and basically just letting them know what we're up to, because a lot of these guys, are I'm gonna say ivory towers, but everybody's on an island in their own sphere, and doesn't listen to anything else. But it's making that outreach and saying, hey, did you hear about this? Communities are doing these things, so what are we doing to affect that, or at least address it, or even say that it exists? And these are some of the challenges that I heard that they're facing, whether they be financial, political, or policy, and how, these renewable energy dollars are really going to be effectively spent and have an effect that's lasting, because we're all paying taxes. So we're all paying for this. And, everybody has a voice and a right to speak into their legislatures. And that's a good place to start.
Thank you, Joseph. Anybody else? And let me add to that question, because maybe then it'll be easier for you. Someone else asked if you had any books, podcasts, videos, movies, or anything else that you recommend, or you've written or prepared to learn about Indigenous practices, and how can we use the information for collaboration for partners instead of assimilation or appropriation? And I'm going to modify that and take out Indigenous and just say for everyone, right? For all of those who have been victims of colonial practices, shall we say. It was hard to think about that. And Joe, I see you have, Joseph, I see you've come up.
I was going to say, I like the way you said it. I'm interested in what Jennifer's got to say, because she's my leader now. So.
Jennifer.
Oh man, I'm trying to think of books and podcasts. I've been reading a lot of Native Hawaiian books just to, as I mentioned, I'm trying to re-educate myself within my own culture and in history. So there's different Native bookstores back in Hawaii, and scholars that I've been looking at. And again, intersection, not just of energy, right? There's a lot, and John and Joseph touched on this within their tribes and context of culture of land and environment. And so how does that relate from resource management, understanding how energy can intersect and where it could. Podcasts, I feel like there's a number of them if you Google, but one of the podcasts that I love is Seen on Radio. It provides a lot of context and history, especially around racism, systematic racism within the country and how our country was founded, which helps, I feel like, a lot of white leaders understand the importance of conversations when we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and ableism, and then racial and social equity. So that's, I would say, could be a foundational resource depending on your journey. But I feel like there's a lot of resources out there. It really depends on where folks are at and how much they want to be uncomfortable. I've had a lot of conversations with leaders who don't like to be uncomfortable in this space. And so therefore their growth and learning is going to be a lot slower than others who are willing to embrace that uncomfortableness in that journey, and willingness to have really hard and challenging conversations that can lead to collaboration and partnerships.
Thank you, Jennifer. And we'll let John and Adewale have the final word on this.
Yeah, I'll just say briefly that I read a great book that came, I think it was written in the late 90s, 1990s, I should say. It was called Lakota Culture, World Economy. And it was by Kathleen Pickering. She's, I think, an archaeologist at CSU in Fort Collins. And she did, I mean, the way that she wrote it to me was obviously not a Native person, but I felt like that was advantageous for this book because she was able to write it in such a way where she really was able to kind of get into and talk to different people on the reservation and see it from an outsider perspective, kind of the way that some of the local people are thinking about themselves and how there's this sense of like us and them, or they will never be us. And there's this, you know, there's always that. And in that case, there's a sense of like, well, kind of throwing your hands up like, that's just the way it is. So I would recommend that book. I mean, it's a little bit, it's not a huge read, maybe a couple hundred pages or so, but that was pretty good in my opinion when I had read it. And I, keep a copy here, for myself. So, but for me, this is just a good opportunity, to share and know that there are, also not to forget, there are plenty of folks who come from indigenous communities who live in cities, Cleveland, Denver, Los Angeles, all over the place. They're not just reservation-based natives. And we can't forget about them. They left the reservation because of lack of opportunity. And sometimes some of these federal dollars don't reach them because they're not on the reservation. So I feel like there needs to be some concerted effort to make sure that they get some of the resources that are out there because they left for that exact reason. And they are no less native than the next person. They just happen to leave the reservation. So I'll just kind of be brief with my response on that. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Anything to add, Adewale?
I'll just be brief because I know we're up against the clock, but I believe in the power of collaboration. I think we're all resource and capacity constrained in some kind of way. So we're stronger together. We're stronger as one. So I would just say the more collaboration, the better. I think we're all like-minded and, going in the same direction on a lot of this. And I know that the work I cannot do without partners. So, and then besides that, just having platforms like this where we can continue to have these conversations. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to sit with these leaders and with you, Adrienne, to have this conversation today.
Thank you. I just want to thank you all four of you. You're awesome. And this has been such a great conversation. I wish we could continue longer. I'm not playing about that. I have the rest of the evening. No, I'm just kidding. But I really want to thank you. And I should have asked if you have social media, if you'd like to put that in the chat so that people can have access to that. I think that this is phenomenal, and I hope that we will be crossing paths again, both in our work with your work with NWF and our work individually with you. This has just been wonderful. So on that note, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I'm going to do right and turn this back over to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Adrienne, and thank you so much to all of our incredible panelists for your time and more importantly for your work. I'm feeling inspired and really grateful. I put in the chat my email if you want to be a part of the Clean Economy Coalition of Color listserv. Send me a note and we'll make sure to add you. This coalition will be doing more events throughout the year on clean energy, but many other issues besides. So, and stay tuned for more information. And I see Adrienne put her email in the chat as well. We're always available to chat. So thank you again to everyone for your time and your work, for everyone who joined us. And with that, I'll give you back the rest of your evening. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.